Hello, and welcome to the Creative Career Change podcast with me, Hannah Ash. I make my living working simultaneously as a music teacher, an interior designer, a writer, a podcaster, and more. You can read more about me and my work on Substack. Visit shayhanny.substack.com. That's Shayhanny spelled Chezhanny. In today's episode, I'm talking to serial career pivoter Lara Hayward. Lara, welcome to Creative Career Change podcast. I'm so happy that we finally get a chance to talk. I know we've been kind of trying to get this lined up for a while. So huge welcome. And could we start with you introducing yourself and telling us how you currently earn a living?
Yes, thanks, Hannah. It's really, really good to be here. Loved hearing from everyone else. So thank you for having me on. I currently earn a living. I'm in a full-time role at the moment, working for a skateboarding organisation in a sort of quasi-legal safeguarding welfare inclusion role. And that was part-time, but it's extended back up to full-time. And I do some exec coaching on the side. And also every now and again, a little bit of film and TV extra work, but that's a tiny, tiny bit. Often the most fun.
That sounds very exciting. I'm interested to delve into that a little bit as well and how you got into it. But can you maybe talk us through your career journey so far? Because I know there's been lots of kind of twists and turns. So maybe start from the beginning and give us a bit of an overview of how you've got to this place.
Yep. My career started in the legal field, which is not something I ever anticipated I'd end up in. But I think it was probably one of those generations that I certainly felt like, well, on some level I needed to have a profession. So did something that sounded like a job, even though that wasn't really something I'd been looking at up until that point. So I worked as a lawyer for nearly 10 years and in various roles in private practice, in-house, and ended up in a sports organisation. And I think at that point I kind of knew if I wasn't going to enjoy it there, then it's probably time to move on and do something different. So I left without any concrete plan, apart from wanting to take a career break and exploring some of the things I really loved. So I was traveling, sport, creative things, going back to study English literature, which is something I'd always wanted to do. Then that brought me to Oxford, and whilst I was studying, I needed a little bit of income, so I took up a part-time role at the career service there. Which actually ended up becoming a big part of my career. It was a really fantastic place to work, had amazing colleagues, and I actually ended up leading on creative industries there alongside a bit of law and sport, and it was really, really rewarding. So I kind of knew that I loved the sort of coaching, mentoring, developing people side, but again, it wasn't a plan to end up there, but I'm very glad I did. And then, so I did that until the pandemic, and then obviously that changed the role quite a lot because it was very face-to-face, lots of events, one-to-one coaching, and then that all went online, obviously like for a lot of people, which changed the role for me, but I was sort of coming up to the point where I wanted to do something different anyway. And I think that's what I've learned about myself. I probably have 2 to 3 year cycles of doing something and then moving into something else. And then from there, I actually took a sabbatical to go to circus school, which sounds bonkers, but I think, it is available to more people than what we probably realise. And we'll probably talk about that a bit more later. And I think that was sort of, it wasn't really a career move. It was just something I really felt I needed to do because I love movement and being active and was looking for ways to try and explore that, I think, more. Then the pandemic kind of, condensed that to a shorter time than what was initially anticipated. So from there, I went back to the career service and then was asked to move into a wellbeing lead role. So it's much more sort of strategic operational role at Oxford. I set up their staff wellbeing program there. And that was the last thing I did before arriving in skateboarding, which again was never never a real plan, but I knew I wanted to get back into sport. I was missing sort of cultural elements, and skateboarding, I think, like surfing, it's a lot more cultural than sport actually, and there's lots of creative elements. So that's what drew me to it, and that's why I'm where I am now.
That's so interesting. And I want to just circle back a little bit to the point that you said when you were choosing your degree subject, and you said that you ended up doing a degree in something that was a job. And can you maybe tell us what you ideally would have wanted to, or did want to do at that point, but got persuaded out of?
I think the strange thing is, I mean, I think I really wanted to study English because that's something that I loved. I really like words. I was writing a lot back then. I mean, terrible poetry, so I'm not sure it counts as writing, but I enjoyed it. And I had a place to study English, and then I went traveling. And I think I have this memory of somebody saying to me, "Oh, what are you going to do with an English degree? Are you going to teach?" And at the time, I couldn't think of anything worse. And that's no shade on teaching. It's more that I just thought I would be a terrible teacher. I think that was literally the catalyst for changing. And then the only real thought that went into it was like, okay, well, what's similar to English, but is a job? And in my head at that time, it was law. And I don't think I really, and it makes me a little bit sad now. I've thought about it much more than that, but I don't think anyone else was really. I think we were all just sort of going, oh, yeah, we'll do these things and we'll try them. It's only sort of with hindsight when I look back at all the things that I was actually doing and loving, it was probably nothing to do with either of those things. I was kind of very active, always outside, painting, those sorts of things, the things that I think, I don't know, it's almost like people don't. I was about to say people don't take them seriously. And not that's true. That's not true. And I know certainly on Substack people do, which is why it's nice to be here.
But
But
maybe not always. And I think, sorry, the reason I feel like I've wanted to pick up on this point is just that it sort of resonates with me a little bit because I mean, I studied music at university in the end, but I actually started off my degree course doing a joint honours degree in music and maths, which is just the most like, it's now it's like that's a crazy combination. And actually the only reason I ended up doing that combination to start with was for the same reasons as you've just described there, which was people saying, well, what are you going to do with the music degree? Are you, you'll be a teacher. I mean, it actually turned out that that's what I ended up doing for a bit, but that's not the point. And it was the same thing for me that it was these little voices from, I don't know, I can't remember who specifically, sort of questioning, well, is that a good idea? And so I sort of listened to them, and then I looked for a course that I didn't want to give up on the music completely, but I found a course that did both, and I was limited to like 5 universities in the country or something that did this very strange combination of two subjects. I did it for a year. I hated the maths. It was just like this other language that I mean, I'd done A level and I was okay at it, but I didn't want to do it any further. And unfortunately, I was able to switch to just a straight music course, but it was the same kind of thing. It was quite bad advice, really. Um,
yeah. Yeah, and it's bonkers when I look back and just think how easily, I don't, I mean, it's so hard to know what's a sort of accurate memory, but it's just like it really didn't take much for me to go, oh yeah, I should probably be doing something else. And then sort of, followed that through for a number of years, really, I think, before developing the courage to kind of go, hold on a minute, this actually doesn't fit. I want to do something else. I think that's true for a lot of people, actually.
I think it probably is. I mean, given that we both have a similar sort of experience of it, I can only imagine that there's an awful lot of other people out there that have had, the same sort of situations. But I think it's also interesting how so often we come back to things that we really did enjoy when we were young, children, teenagers. You said about writing poetry and painting and all the creative things that you enjoy doing, and that's kind of what you've almost circled back to realizing that you love, and the sport and those things are our passions for a reason. And I think it's so easy to kind of think that they're not important at the time, and they really are, aren't they? um
Yeah.
but yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about catalysts for change because so you've had quite a lot of different careers that have looked very different. And I wonder what the catalysts have been each time, whether there's any kind of theme amongst them or whether it is just circumstantial each time.
Oh, that's a great question. I think the catalyst is probably trying a number of things to make it work and then kind of going, you know what? it's not working, so let's do something else. One of my friends always says to me, you know, that I live my life by trial and error. And that actually feels really accurate. It's like, okay, I do try lots of things and I'm really interested in lots of things. And I feel like that, actually, I feel like that's what I've been doing for most of my life. It's like, okay, well, let's give that a go and see how that lands or that feels. And I think what's interesting is like almost since I've hit 40, like that's becoming so much clearer, as in like what are my things, what are the things I really want to spend time on. I was actually reading your most recent post as well about sort of signposts and investing in yourself, and just having a lot more of that where I'm like, yeah, that is an obvious thing I should be doing and I'm going to commit to it no matter what. And I think that sort of come with confidence, but also probably all that trial and error experience and kind of getting better at knowing, you know, what's a kind of no and getting out quicker. I wish I'd kind of learned that earlier, but you know, I suppose your path is your path, and you just kind of have to go with it.
Yeah. I think it is confidence, isn't it? A lot of it, because I think we are sort of conditioned a little bit to think that we choose a job and then that's your job, and that sort of doesn't define you, but it defines a part of you, I guess, to some extent. And so I don't know, have you ever felt, and perhaps you feel less this way now because you've got building that confidence, but in the past, I wonder if you've ever felt sort of a bit like you're doing it wrong. The fact that you feel this need to keep wanting to change or do something else.
Yeah, I've frequently, probably most of the time, just, and I think I've actually had that thought, you know, like what is wrong with me? Everyone else seems to be settled, or everyone else seems to know. Along with, you know, thoughts around, am I wanting too much? You know, is it, you know, am I just not kind of accepting that, you know, I'm sort of fortunate to be where I am, and those kind of things. And I think sometimes we're sort of made to, you know, I think there's so many things now, especially with social media and sort of like the wider noise out there, where it's even harder to know those things, I think, or easier to get sort of blindsided by other influences that actually have nothing to do with your kind of immediate circumstance. So yeah, I've definitely felt that. And I think I still do sometimes. I still think, you know, where is this sort of constant seeking coming from? Um, but then also, in a positive way, it's led me to doing lots of really interesting things and exploring other things. And so I think there's always a sort of flip side to that. I think we can always kind of shift a mindset around it. I think the other thing that's hard, and I'd be so curious to know your thoughts on this because of your teaching background, I think when we're younger, you know, schools kind of condition us that there is a pathway and sort of exams and grades, that there is this system effectively of external validation. Like we're very rarely encouraged to kind of self-direct learning. And then I think if that's our conditioning for a number of years, it's quite hard to get out of that track unless you have really, you know, well-developed self-assurance.
I think that's definitely true. Yeah. And I think what doesn't help, the young people I've sort of worked with who were kind of choosing their A levels or then going on to choose degree subjects or work out what they want to do post A levels. I think because certainly in the UK, we expect 16-year-olds to choose 3 or 4 subjects to narrow it down to at that age. I think that is a bit of a problem in some ways. I think there are quite a lot of other countries where the system is a bit different and it's a bit broader. Um, but certainly in England, and well, I think it's the same or broadly the same in sort of Scotland and Wales as well, and Northern Ireland. But we expect them to make these choices age 16, which do then often have quite a significant bearing on what they end up doing. Because if you choose a certain range of subjects, you might then be stopping yourself from being able to study something at university. The thing I would miss the most if I stopped teaching completely would be spending time with teenagers, because I think teenagers are really underrated in terms of their wisdom and their ability to see the world in an interesting way. And actually, I think often they have quite a good measure of things, but what they are often quite pressurized by is the adults around them. So often it's parents who are pushing them in a direction, maybe in a way that we experienced ourselves, in the way that we've mentioned a little bit earlier, but certainly adults kind of trying to, whether it's parents trying to, live out their own ideals through their children. I see that sometimes. Or just them trying to please other people. I think that's something that teenagers do. Lots of us do. Um, and so whenever I have the opportunity to talk to them, particularly in the last few years since I've kind of done what I've been doing and been making various changes, I do try and say to them, look, this doesn't define you. Go with what feels right at the moment. That might change in 10 years' time, less than that, who knows? Equally, you might choose this thing and it works for you, and that's great. But it doesn't have to define you. But yes, I think the education system probably does have a lot to answer for in that. It's very linear, it's all very, you pick this and then you do that and then you do that. Um, and there's not a lot of emphasis put on this idea of sidestepping, because actually sometimes that's a perfectly valid thing to do. I think we've probably both experienced that in our careers where you're not constantly, or you get to a point where you've been climbing a ladder and you think, why am I climbing this ladder? I'm not interested in it. This isn't what I want. So I don't know, but yes, it's an interesting one that I think I see that side of things a little bit differently now. And sometimes I do end up mentoring for sort of UK when they're applying to university and things like that. I quite enjoy that side of things because it's quite an interesting time to have a conversation about the real world and things like that. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's an interesting one, I think.
I think that's why I love doing the career work at university stage, because one, I just love being around young people, and it's been such an interesting mirror, because I think in my head I'm only about maybe 5 years older than people at university, and then you're sat opposite them and you're like, oh god, no, I'm really really old. But they have such an amazing energy, and I think it's what I suppose it sort of mirrors your experience. It's like there's all this possibility and potential, but it's also a time when they start getting more sort of external influences, or either tutors or parents, or just seeing what peers are doing, and it kind of influences that. And that was really interesting to me. Again, certainly working with people with creative interests, and they clearly wanted to go down that route, but then everyone else was doing management consultancy or whatever, and suddenly it was like, oh, I should be doing that.
Yeah.
But it is a cool time to be working with people. I think when they're that age.
And I think the more lived experience we have, I guess, the more you can help. It makes sense in so many areas of life, I suppose. Just coming back to this kind of idea of confidence in making changes, have you found that the more you kind of read books or find out about other people who feel similar, that kind of feel like every 2 to 3 years they might want a different job? Because I have talked to a lot of people who say that recently, but I think until a couple of years ago, I didn't really know that was very much of a thing. So what maybe has helped you in terms of books or other people out there, in terms of your confidence with making these changes?
Also a great question. I think for me, and I kind of don't want to overstate it, but I think it's almost the other way around. I certainly, the first change I made, I think I made it without any, and it was really tough because I made it without thinking really about financially, if this doesn't work, what am I going to do? Or, so it was a really steep learning curve. So I think I kind of made the change because I just felt like I really needed to make a change. And then once the sort of dust from that settled, I think I then started meeting people. For me, it's being around people who are doing similar things and kind of recognizing there are other ways. And I think that really helps. It certainly helped me to see other pathways and know things are possible. And then you don't feel like an outlier. I mean, certainly as a lawyer, I was like, I think from the outside, everyone was like, you've got an amazing job at a sports organization, la 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 la. And I just was like, I'm just in an office all day, like I'm not. And I think the other thing, I think the other it's a catalyst, but actually it's been really helpful. It's like if I sort of meet people and I feel almost envy, and I'm like, wow, oh God, their life sounds so amazing. I really interrogate that. I'm like, oh, what's that about? What is it that I see in them that clearly I'm drawn to, or I'd like to be experiencing more? So I think I've been more driven by that. But that said, thinking about books, I think that have helped change. Herminia Ibarra's books. I think she's an academic at London Business School, but she has a great book it's called Working Identity. So it's a really lovely way of almost, I think her, and I don't want to get it wrong, but sort of paraphrasing what my understanding of her thesis, it's, we're able to change by trying on different identities and just actually taking action and going out there and seeing what feels right. And by doing that, you meet other people who are doing similar things and it helps you grow. And that was a really helpful book for me, actually, and still is. It's one that I go back to. So I'd really recommend that. And then I think the other ones that really helped me, and I've used these with students as well, it's the Bill Burnett and Dave Evans sort of they have designing your life, designing your work life. And again, I didn't really know much about it until I sort of went through the process, but they very much sort of use design principles. So you're kind of almost ideating your kind of ideal roles. And it sort of gave me permission really to try on again different identities, which I think really worked for me. I don't think I could have done it any other way. It felt like having permission to just go and play and explore a bit, which again, coming from the legal sector, that feels totally alien. But I think when I was in that space, I was like, oh, this actually suits me and my personality and temperament. So yeah, they're the sort of two books I'd recommend. And then also I think that leads you then to building a network of people who are at least curious about doing things differently, which really helps.
Yeah, it's like one thing leads to another, doesn't it? You find out about one thing and then you hear that person write or read, say something about another thing that leads you in a different direction. And yeah, I mean, I found that I kind of will explore one book, and then I read a book recently. It's on my shelf. I'm just checking the title of it. It's called How to Be Everything. It's called, and it's by
Ooh.
Emily Wapnick. I'll send you a link to it afterwards. But I read that quite recently, and that was one of those. Ah, yes. Every other sort of few pages, I was kind of going, "That's me," and that's very much about kind of just wanting to try everything, not everything literally, but obviously, but try different things and not being afraid to say, well, I tried that for a bit and actually wasn't quite what I expected. But I took this from it, and because we always take something, don't we, from whatever it is we do, even if we think we failed at it. Um, it isn't necessarily the case. There's always something positive, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time.
Yeah, and it kind of makes it easier I think even those things where you're like, oh wow, that is not for me, it makes it much easier to discount it and move
Yeah, because
on.
then
Yeah, which I think is actually exactly.
I know recently you applied for a job, and that didn't quite work out how you maybe hoped, but it perhaps links in with this idea of things not always being how we want them to be, but how we can learn from it. So, would you be okay to share a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's probably the most excited I've been about applying for a job for a long time. I knew some of the members of the team I'd be working with, and I knew the organisation and the role. Um, but it was, and probably relevant to this podcast, it was part-time, but also a leadership role, very creative, lots of design, working with people in the creative industries as well. And it would have allowed me to develop my own business on the side, and do more coaching. But because it was something I really wanted, it was almost harder to apply for. And I think that's that thing about fear of failure, or, because if you apply for something that you sort of half want, it's okay if you don't get an interview or you don't get it. But I did get an interview for this one, and I really enjoyed the process. I think I did as much prep as I possibly could have done, and then didn't get it. And I'm not ashamed to say, actually, I was absolutely devastated. And I think because I'd almost like faced that rejection, and I knew it was something I really wanted. And it's interesting because I haven't been in that position for a while, but I was reminded that when you face a rejection, it can almost feel like every other rejection you've ever faced. So I was like, oh wow, okay, that's hit bigger than I imagined. But I think on the positive side, I did actually follow up with the recruiter and ask for feedback, which at the time felt really difficult because, again, I had all these narratives around, oh, I failed, or was thinking about, this is what I should have done in the interview, or this is how I should have approached it. I think, you know, she was amazing in terms of giving me feedback. And she said, first of all, you know, anyone who asks, I will always offer it, because I know it can be a tough thing to do after a rejection. Um, so I think that's a reminder to me, and maybe other people, that if you're in that situation, definitely ask for feedback. It's always worthwhile. But long story short, you know, the reason I didn't get it is because I think there were two people who were sort of above me in the ranking, and they had directly relevant experience for the job. So there's probably not much I could have done. But, you know, I think the other things they said were like, you know, with the experience I did have, which wasn't, you know, I was trying to make transfer my skills. You know, they said I did a hell of a lot with what I did have. Both of the other people on the team said they would have loved to work with me. They gave me really helpful tips for development, and it was just a really positive experience. And now I feel like I have a slightly broader network with people connected into an industry that I want to move into. And what felt negative at the time actually turned out into a really positive experience. And I feel quite proud now of sort of doing that, because it was a stretch in a number of ways. Yeah, so really, yeah, it feels really positive. It's nice, you know. I talk about it now, and I just feel, yeah, have like a warm feeling about it. Whereas if you'd spoken to me on the day that I got the rejection email, it would have been a really different story.
It's so interesting how time can just help us see things a bit differently.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's a weird one, isn't it, as well, that asking for feedback after a rejection, because you kind of, I don't know about you, but I've asked for it in situations like that before, and I kind of want it. Like, I desperately want to know what they thought, but I also kind of don't. Like, it's that sort of like, oh, they're going to say things that I didn't want to hear. And I remember one a few years back. It was when I was still teaching full time, but I applied for it was a similar role to the role that I was doing, but it was in a different school, and it was a really high performing school that had, I guess it wasn't really a promotion, but it was a sidestep, but also in a place that was quite prestigious. And, you know, so, and I, like you, put just like everything into this interview, and just, it was the most intense day of so much stuff. And I didn't get it. And yeah, they said that they would give feedback, and I kind of tentatively asked for it. And I remember when it first came through and I read some of it, I had that kind of like, you know, sort of a bit pathetic, a bit petty, and kind of like, oh, I don't want to read that. And then the next day, you know, I looked at it again. It's like, oh, okay, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I did do that, you know, or like, and it's so important, isn't it, to kind of to look at it objectively, but it can be really hard, because a job, you can invest so much of your time and energy into wanting something, and then, you know, if it doesn't work, then,
Yeah.
but we learn a lot from it. And I guess even the process of like putting all, if you know, when you haven't, if you haven't done it for a while, I mean, I think for me at that particular time, I hadn't applied for a job for quite a long time, and even just putting yourself back in that situation, kind of, you know, quite important. Um, I'm interested to know sort of how your family and friends react each time you say, I'm going to circus school now, or whatever it is. And maybe you can tell us a bit about circus school as well, because I'm quite intrigued about that.
Oh, I think they're used to it now. I think when I first left law, you know, I remember my mum was sort of like, I mean, my parents are, I should caveat this by saying they are amazing, and I don't think they've ever really, you know, not in any, I've never had that sort of pressure from my parents. Like, I think they've always been quite, you know, supportive of things we're doing. But I think because mum, and I think, you know, I see this now, you know, as an adult. Mum never went to university, you know, she left school, went straight into work. So I think, you know, there was an element of slightly living through me and my sister, and kind of seeing the opportunities that we'd had. And I remember when I was like leaving law, and mum was just like, are you sure? Like, are you sure? And I could see her brain going. But I think she also said, she was like, oh, Lara, you know, we always know that you're probably just going to follow what you want to do anyway. So there's no point us trying to kind of interject, which was really interesting, because I'd never considered myself as sort of like headstrong, or and she, so it actually opened up a really nice conversation. But I think whereas at the start they'd probably say, well, have you thought about this, or is now they're just like, okay, fine. I just think, and my sister's actually the same. She's gone through 3 career changes, space engineer, then
Wow.
landscape architect, and then she's just finished a PhD. So I think I mean, I blame them, frankly. I mean, there's clearly something in us where we're just, or my sister and I, where we're just kind of, yeah, wanting to explore things. Although there is a thread through them all. I think that's the thing. I think people outside sort of think it's quite random, but actually in my head there are threads through them. I don't think they're totally
Can you
obscure.
talk us
So
through what you think
yeah.
the thread is? Because I think that's quite an interesting point. Or is that is that a difficult one?
It is a difficult one, but I'm so glad you've asked, because I think it's something that I've often wondered, because I think certainly when if you start your own business in any way, people want you to talk about niche and what and I'm like, I have no idea what mine is, because I've done so many different things and I almost don't want to shut it down. So I've been trying to think of what that thread is. So even when I was in law, I was a sort of medical healthcare lawyer. So I think there was a sort of sense of coming in and understanding problems and wanting to support people with solutions, for like the benefit of like better systems, just making things better, which I know probably sounds like a trite cliche, but and I think that probably is the thread through. I think the careers work is the same thing. Sometimes I wonder, did I end up in that because it would have actually been really nice to have a careers advisor at that point in my life when I was making decisions. And I think because I really realized, like, when I ended up working with people who are interested in creative stuff, even if they were going into, say, corporate careers or grad schemes, I would always say, a bit like you, like, just try and keep the creative thing going in some way. Don't ever let it go. And even if it's a tiny thing, just keep that thread going. So yeah, I mean, maybe it's sort of just trying to make things a bit better and a bit more like consider things more holistically. I think that's been a thread, and I think even in my coaching, I try, because I'm trained as an exec coach, but I've done a lot in well-being science, working with athletes, and I sort of try and bring that in as well. So it's, even though people tend to come to me, I think, for career coaching, there's often a lot going on around and outside that. So I don't know if that answers the question. I feel like I've waffled a
Yeah,
bit.
no, it does. It absolutely does. And I think there is clearly a thread. And I think it's quite an interesting thing to think about when you feel sometimes that lots of different ideas come from all over the place and they're all quite disparate, but they're often not completely disparate, are they? Once you drill down, as I just made you do. Sorry.
No, it's good for me, Hannah. It's good for me. I like it.
But there is often that thread, and it is quite a good thing, I think, to sometimes think about what it is, because that can help to guide where the next step might be, because that thread is usually present, whether we realize it or not. But
Yeah. And understanding values and sort of guiding principles. I think things like that can be quite helpful. I think that's why I think it's quite a nice thing to kind of wonder about. It's like there's something in there that's taking me in certain directions. So
definitely,
it's
and
obviously important.
yeah, I think I've found, certainly with kind of everything I've learned over the past few years of starting a business and everything that comes with that, you can't have your core values on day one necessarily. You don't know what they are, you don't know what's going to happen or how things are going to pan out, and it's very much that important process of just constantly pausing and kind of going, okay, where am I at now, what's happened, what can I learn from, what has actually what's becoming clearer, I suppose, because that's what I find, that every so often I think, oh, that's what I really like about this particular field. I mean, the recent one for me is trying to work out within interior design, which part of it is it that I really like? Because there are some bits of it that I don't really enjoy, and but there are lots of bits of it that I do. But I'm really trying to kind of tease out what that part of it is that I do want to do, and try to follow that. And I guess it's like you saying about law. Well, law is a huge field of
Yeah.
of a career. It's not like that's just one job, is it? There's so many different strands within that. Um, just the notion of being a lawyer doesn't cannot possibly mean one thing, I imagine. So
No, it can't. Although everyone, whatever area you're qualified in, people will always ask you about sort of boundary disputes with neighbours and property
yeah,
transactions. That's not my. Um, but yeah, it's interesting because I think law now. I wouldn't have said it at the time, but I realise there's actually a lot I enjoyed about being a lawyer. I think and it does lend itself well to some of the skills that I have. So again, it's sort of I think when I was leaving, it was like easy to blame the subject or the sector. It's like, no, it's just that it wasn't quite the right fit and didn't allow space for creative interest. So it's not necessarily law to blame. It's just that I think like a lot of us, I have more interest and I really want to be able to explore them and use them in my day to day. And actually, I mean that's why I love your Substack. I think the way you were sort of saying that you're sort of exploring what bits of interior design you like. I think that's for me. That's why I sort of really follow it and get a lot from it because it feels like your process is kind of out there. And again, it's really nice to kind of see that and realize that it's so. I just wanted to say it's really helpful for other people. So yeah.
oh, thank you. Thank you so much. That's really nice. I mean, I think that is something that I'm learning is very important to share the process, because I think so often we just all we see is like a polished end result of something, and we have no real idea of what somebody went through to kind of get to that point. Um, and yeah, I just think the older I get, the more I'm like, actually, the process is actually very enjoyable, in lots of respects. Not always, but a lot of the time, reflecting on the process and thinking about why something feels the way it does, I get quite a lot of satisfaction out of that. And I think that's often what leads me to think, oh, well, that's the next place I need to go to. So I think it's quite important to share it. And I enjoy sharing it. But that's really nice of you to say that. So I very much appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm definitely trying to learn from it because I think something that sort of like blocked like a self limiter really in my own business is like this sense that everything that goes out has to be perfect. And of course it, I mean, and what is that anyway? I don't know where that comes from, but it's definitely stopped me from progressing as fast as I could have done. So
I understand that feeling as well because I have that too. But I think I've increasingly tried to just be more like, no, that isn't ready, but I'm just going to do it anyway. Deal with the fallout later. But yeah. Actually, so on the note, you mentioned creativity a moment ago. Do you feel that by making these changes that you have over the years, that you've allowed yourself to be and live more creatively?
yes, and I think now, unfortunately, work has taken over again, which is why I'm at the point of looking for change. But certainly up until about 3 months ago, I was actually sort of prioritizing everything around the two dance classes that I go to, and I commit it. And again, that sounds like it's almost like I said something terrible out loud, to say that like. But I realize if I go to those classes and then everything else is better, and it's just going for the sheer love of it, and I don't need any other reason, and I think that's probably the best, healthiest, happiest year I've had, doing that. And that was a real lesson for me, I think. And hopefully I'm going to kind of continue that, and I think sometimes it has to change. I think there are times maybe we either need to prioritize earning a bit more money or whatever else. So that's the sort of phase I'm in now, but I don't think I'll ever lose that sense of, if I prioritize my life around the things that actually enable me to be better, then why would I not do that? That makes so much sense. And why are we not talk? That's how we should be thinking really about.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think it's a really healthy way to think about living, I think, to do what you've just said, which is to go, I know that by doing those two dance classes a week, that I feel better, my life feels better. That when that's the priority and I make that work, then things work, slot into place. And honestly, I think more people should live in that way because I think they would realize that it's not a frivolous thing or it's not a silly way of thinking of things. And I my equivalent of your dance class, I think, at the moment is a pottery class that I do, and it's the same thing. You know, I just go there, I make a huge mess. I'm not very good at it. I don't really know what I'm doing. I just kind of, you know, see what happens, and it's the best 2.5 hours of the week. Um, and it goes by in a flash. You know, it just happens, and the people that I meet there are lovely, and the conversations are really nice. But there's no pressure, there's no it's not competitive. It's, you know, it's just something that allows you to just be. And, you know, I think everybody should discover their own version of that, really.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree.
You know, and I think whether it's something creative, or if it's a sport, or a different kind of hobby, I think there are so many different things that we can do to have those sorts of experiences. But I think they should more emphasis and more priority really ought to be put on them. So yeah, I think that's a very good point to make. Can I just ask about sort of how you feel in terms of sort of financially, compared to when you were doing your full-time job, perhaps working as a lawyer, compared with now? Like how does that feel? Like, I mean, I'm making a presumption that you probably don't make as much money as you once did, but does that matter, and how does that kind of impact you at the moment?
Yeah, I think I would be lying if I didn't say it does sort of cause anxiety every now and again. But I know, certainly both me and my partner, we've made, I'd say, a lot of choices where I think what I found is as I've gotten older, as I've been able to like really get clear on what's important to me, actually some of the stuff I used to spend money on, I just don't spend money on anymore. And I think for me, actually moving out of London really helped because I know, just being in London, lunch, you just buy lunch every day, out. And I look back now and I'm like, oh my God, just so much money being spent on, things I wasn't even aware of. So whereas now it's so different, I sort of really, I mean, I save a lot more and it sort of prioritize it, for the things that I really want to do. And I actually ask those questions each time. It's like, do I need this? Is this gonna help me sort of develop in any way? So I think my kind of needs have got simpler, which has helped the financial side. I think there's every now and again that's probably more like ego related, when I sort of, think about how much I could be earning if I'd stayed in law, but then, that's not really engaging with the full, it's like, well, yeah, if I'd stayed in law, I'd have a very different life and probably be commuting to the office and, sat inside most of the day. So it's not worth it. But again, it's interesting the sort of questions and thoughts that come up around that, this sort of sense of what we should be. I think I still have a little sense of, oh, that's perhaps what I should be doing, even though I know that's not true for me. Yeah, so I think it's sort of a healthy balance. But again, I think going back to part-time, and I'm also thinking about going back to study. If that happens, then I can feel I'm like, oh, but I don't think that's a reason not to do it. I think it's just more it's contingency planning, it's making sure got enough for basic expenses and everything else. And yeah, fingers crossed it'll all work
Yeah,
out.
no, that sounds very sensible. I think we could probably just go on talking for a really, really long time, but I am going to ask a final question. Um, what advice do you have for anyone listening who is either thinking of making a career change, or maybe wants to go part-time in their job so that they can do more creative things?
I think one thing I learned probably a little bit too late is, if you actually quite enjoy your job, but full time is just too much, then just go and ask the question about whether it's possible to go part time. I think I know a lot of people who'd really like to drop down a day or 2 days, but they're just worried about how that will be received. And I think just go in and ask and see what people say. So that would be one thing. The second thing is probably just go and speak to or find someone who is doing something similar to what you want to do, or the way their life's set up, or perhaps it's more specific than that they're actually working in or studying in something that you're really curious about, and just connect with them and say, oh, I'm really interested in what you do. Would you be up for having a bit of a chat or a coffee? Or because I think generally people who have been in this position or been in that person's position know what it's like to feel perhaps a little bit alone in it or a little bit unsure. So actually it's really nice when people kind of connect with you say, I'm really curious about, what you're doing right now, I'd love to have a chat. I mean, I know I can't really enjoy it, I think, for that reason, because it's, yeah, and I find it really interesting as well. Like, I think I'm fascinated by people and sort of what they do and interests. So yeah, definitely connect with people and don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And I think you're absolutely spot on about the part-time thing, because certainly for me, that's been a real game changer in still having some regular money coming in, but just giving me just that bit of freedom and a bit of time to kind of figure things out. And it just doesn't often seem like something that's possible for a lot of people. Sometimes people I think, oh, you can only go part-time, if you need it for childcare reasons, or you can only go but you have to have a
Yeah,
reason for it. You don't have to have a reason for it. There's no need to explain why you need it or want it. And actually, if you don't ask, you don't get, do you? So
you never know. And I think it just gives you some brain space. So even if it's to go back up to full time, or to think about doing something else, it allows that space for creative time, or just doing something totally different. So you can, I think, shape any ideas or threads that are coming up in a better way.
definitely. I'd never have launched this podcast if I hadn't gone part-time in my teaching. And actually this podcast has, in itself has just brought me so much joy, just by connecting with people, just talking to people, hearing about other people's stories, and then being able to share those with others that it might be helpful with. And I think that's just one example of something that wouldn't have happened, I think, if that question hadn't been asked. So yeah, I think that's very, very sound advice. Well, Lara, thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy to talk to you. Honestly, I think we could just carry on for a long time, but maybe we'll have to do a episode two, part two or something at some point, but who knows.
Yeah, you probably have to do part twos with everyone that's been
Oh
on, just to
yeah,
see where they are in
revisited. It'll be like
future.
location,
Yeah,
location, location, or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah, yeah,
Well, there you go. There's an idea.
yeah. There we go. There we go. We didn't even get onto circus
Oh
school, but
no, we
maybe I should
didn't.
write.
Oh my
I'll write a
goodness.
post about it. That'll give me something to write about. If anyone's curious, get in touch for circus tips or not.
We'll
But
put
yeah.
that one in the next episode, definitely. Part two.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Hannah.
That was Hannah Ash talking to Lara Hayward on the Creative Career Change podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode and aren't already subscribed, visit shayhanny.substack.com to sign up and receive new episodes direct to your inbox.